Hello, Steve Davis here. Welcome to episode 382 of the Adelaide Show podcast. A super special one because this is part of our month of Tuesdays, 4 episodes to commemorate the Adelaide Show turning 10 years old. 2 special guests. The first one, Nigel Dobson. Nigel was my compadre for around 250 of the 380 plus episodes of the Adelaide Show, and so we check in with him to see what he's up to now that he's a retired cognitive scientist. What does he think about? What does he get on with? What does he recall from our time together, including a few snapshots of some different interviews along the way. But also a man who is threaded into the DNA of this project is John Schumann. The initial name for this podcast, Another Boring Thursday Night in Adelaide, was actually a riff, a twist on a title of a Red Gum song he wrote called One More Boring Thursday Night in Adelaide. It brought us together, the conversation around that. He's been a guest a number of times on the podcast, and he's joining us again for this 10th anniversary because, never to be outdone, he's commemorating the 40th anniversary of that song. I Was Only 19. He's re-recorded it with the Waifs, and it lends a whole lot of new dimension to the song. So in the musical pilgrimage, it will be a pilgrimage indeed when John joins us and shares some of the story and the thinking behind this new version of that iconic Australian song. Enjoy.
Wave on waves, just got a band room. Adelaide, Adelaide, who landed here and made it their home. Adelaide, Adelaide, who 10-pound bombs to the refugees. Adelaide, Adelaide, who brings Italian Sudanese. Adelaide, Adelaide, who oh, little Adelaide, oh, Adelaide, who oh, little Adelaide, who.
In the spirit of reconciliation, the Adelaide Show podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout South Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today.
Adelaide, Adelaide, Adelaide.
Party!
Yes,
10 years.
Party indeed. And we are drinking a Highbank, by the way. We're not doing an essay drink of the week. This is just for our lubrication.
But there is some history to this particular wine, though.
Oh, yes. I used to know Dennis Weiss, who's the winemaker, back in 2013.
Yep.
And that
Which would be 10 years ago.
Yes. This is the 2018. I had a 2004 one of these. And on our very first episode, which was only 4 episodes before you joined us, the cork just crumbled. Brett Monton ran off to get a sieve.
Yep.
But we actually had another, I reckon we've had 1 or 2 cork emergencies over the 250 plus episodes that you're on.
Yeah. Weirdly, we've had 0 Stelvin emergencies.
Yeah, isn't that something?
It's just strange, isn't it? It's like there's a difference between them.
But the romance of the cork. The romance of the cork.
Romance of corked wine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nigel, my goodness. You are the person, second to me, with the longest term of time spent in the Adelaide Show.
It was many years.
It was, wasn't it?
Yep.
Question, during the first 5 years of the whole enterprise, and you were there basically from 5 weeks in, on and off for a bit.
I was on and off for a bit till about episode 50-ish or something.
Yeah. And then we had the big conversion, episode 80, to the Adelaide Show. Hello and welcome to Another Boring Thursday Night in Adelaide, a podcast recorded in Adelaide, for Adelaide, but not always about Adelaide. And with me tonight, my fellow Adelaideans, Brett Monton.
Hello, everyone.
And our special guest Adelaidean tonight, Nigel Dobson.
Hello, everyone.
Yes, Paul Collins on the sickbed.
He's going from both ends from what I've heard.
We don't need that detail. Oh, okay. Coming up on our show tonight, we're going to go round and round the roundabout. We've got our fourth musketeer, Nigel, who's going to be sharing a few things with us and perhaps asking the question, are we in South Australia like frogs in that pan of water slowly being boiled on the stove? The Adelaide Visa Council tonight's going to be kangaroo court style. Do you think, looking back, the fact that it was disciplined to be weekly made it happen as opposed to going with whim? Is there something in that routine that works?
Having a routine always works because it leads to predictability. So makes it easy to do, all in all. Although these days, I guess what we do is record 20 episodes in one go, allow people to binge and download it, just get it all over and done with in one night, really, I guess. But yeah, they were the days, weren't we, when things came out weekly? That's the Netflix model, isn't it? Yeah.
And every now and then, because we do have Netflix. And
but 2013 we didn't.
No, we didn't.
And remember, things used to come out weekly. You'd wait for the episode to come out.
And you didn't think about that other than looking forward to it.
Yes, yeah. You had 6 days of happy looking forward to seeing where things would go, whereas that's been erased these days.
And the thing is, it doesn't even give you a moment to reflect on it because before the final credits have finished, it gives you a countdown of 5 seconds and bang, you're into the next one.
You've got to hit a button to actually see the credits if you wanted to see the credits. And when you're watching them back to back, you don't have a week to think about what you've just seen.
Yeah.
So it's just blown away straight away by the next episode, the next episode, the next episode.
And I could have been glib and say, well, so much TV is disposable. But the difference is Netflix actually brings budget to many of their productions, and some of them have surprised me with their well-structured nuance and layout. So we're not getting the full...
When they moved to overseas sourcing some of their material, I think 3% was the first movie they did overseas, sourced from Spanish mob.
Yep.
That was noticeably different, but since then, the sort of Scandinavian noir that's moved in now is really well written and is really good. You know, there was shows like Dark, which was from Germany. You'd never get that out of America. If Netflix had stayed with, we're only going to do whatever we're doing, you wouldn't have got all of the good European shows where they've got an emphasis on better script writing, character development, and trying to avoid stereotypes to some degree. So, having that huge budget does actually enable them to do good shows.
It's interesting. I hadn't actually thought of the fact that, because every now and then there's a couple of shows at the moment that they are staggering the release of. And I got a bit frumpy. I was like, how dare you? You, Netflix, have indoctrinated me to expect all down.
Yeah.
And so instead of having the sweet spot you were talking about of having a week to marinate and enjoy, it was begrudging. That's sad. I think that's sad.
Well, it's in some way, if you imagine a show's got a quantity of enjoyment or entertainment it can bring to you, if you compress it down to a short period of binging it in one night versus watching it 1 week at a time, and then all the times you might think about it or talk about it with friends, which is what used to happen in the old days, they're getting their customers to get free entertainment by having the delay in it.
Yeah. Okay.
And so your customer will talk about your product without you having to provide any more product.
Yes.
And so when the next week comes around, there's an anticipation, more discussion about the product coming up, then they watch it, and that cycle repeats and repeats. So the total number of hours of value of discussing your show is double what it would now be on with the Netflix model. And they just go for, well, okay, they've got that, they've binge watched that out of the way, we'll hit them with some more binge watch. But overall, they're not, I think like what HBO does, which I've noticed tends to string things out, 1 week at a time, a bit more, seems to generate a lot more discussion about it. It drags out people talking about it. Because if you've got everything available from one night, within a week it's no longer a news story.
Yeah.
Whereas if something drags on, like Game of Thrones was a classic, that's perfect marketing where you've got this, a few quiet scenes and something horrendous will happen in a scene and people will be talking about it again. Yes. And then they'll be like, oh, that was so disgusting, I'm never going to watch it. But it's just generating free discussion about your product without you actually having to put another minute of your product to air because people are still waiting for you've already filmed it, it's sitting there and it's going to, but you get free discussion.
We do. And interesting, I've just finished reading Dopamine Nation by Professor Anna Lemke, who's from Harvard, and she's a psychologist, and she is basically arguing we seek a dopamine hit for that joy, and we are living most of the world, but especially the Western world, where dopamine is on tap. Oh, yeah. Netflix, chocolate, meat, pornography, drugs, it's all there. And now she argued, and I know this is dragging you back to your old world, you're no longer actively working as a cognitive scientist, you have retired, but I will just, while you're here, I just want to unpack this. She argues with this model that when you have something that brings you pleasure, the body naturally tries to, once it gives you that dopamine hit, go, hang on, let's now neutralize that.
Yeah, it's a homeostatic process where you have a certain, same with like antioxidants and things like that. If, as an example, people take antioxidants, what happens is your body goes, oh, I don't need to make that anymore because there's this external source of it, so you don't make it. So the problem is you take an antioxidant something, your body goes, oh, okay, then I guess I don't need to make this. And then it turns off its antioxidant production. And then you then have an antioxidant depression for up to 24 hours, whereas the benefit from what you've just eaten or whatever, or a tablet you've taken only lasts for an hour or two.
Wow.
So the same thing probably happens with dopamine is a homeostatic process. Your body aims, if you're mentally fine and you're not in a totally stressful situation, maintain a certain level of dopamine. If you artificially create more dopamine by doing those sorts of things, your body will learn it doesn't need to generate as much. And so once you've finished with that hit from the artificial source, you're then going to have a dopamine slump, which is like your sugar slump. So,
well, she argues that once you habituate to always just having those hits, the body gets habituated to always be downplaying them. So you need more of
to keep up the same level,
But then she said one thing interesting from the research. If you embark on something that requires pain and deprivation first, your body then goes, oh, hang on, we've got to turn the tables. It actually starts trying to release dopamine, so you've gone for a long walk or whatever. Yep. But she said the hangover is not severe that way around, and you have this bliss for a lot longer. Yeah. Isn't that bizarre?
Well, it's like your sugar fix. You can get, when you eat modern sugary foods, you get a lot more sugar a lot faster than you could ever naturally harvest from, any sort of natural sugar source. And our bodies haven't evolved for dealing with the rate of change.
Yeah.
And so the same on the dopamine, like you get huge hits of dopamine from turning on a TV or whatever, turning on your computer, looking at your mobile phone.
Exactly, waiting to see if anyone's commented.
Yeah. And there's been, well documented, and the algorithms are all designed around the idea of we know how this works, and we know that you give people little constant trickles of someone's read your thing, bing, something else has happened, and then you go and check it and everything, and it gets into this feedback loop where, and they can monitor how long it takes from when it goes bing to when you do something again. So it's quite easy doing, A/B testing to work out what each individual's thresholds of activation is needed and just store that number and tune the algorithm to individual people, because you don't need a general rule for everyone where you can fine-tune it to each individual.
No, and just on this, given that we're in a podcast medium, mass media, etc., is geared to try to give us the dopamine hit all the time. It can't just be something. It's got to be tragedy struck, or it's got to be the Aussie battler who, whatever it is.
Look at the news headlines these days.
Yeah.
Even the mainstream media has fallen into the clickbait-style headlines, to try and generate, fear, or there's something dangerous I don't know about, so I better read this to find out what it is. And it's everyone knows how to recognise those clickbait ones, but it's strange that people have worked out this is how we make more profit.
Yeah.
Because they work. It's like, okay, just because they work, should you do it? And they go, well, yeah, because it makes more profit.
But here's the thing. Something like the Adelaide Show is not set up like that.
What? Our listeners don't get a huge dopamine hit listening to our dulcet tones.
They get a slow release. It's like in my head, I always thought of it as something I was doing for the community, which is probably up myself and overly pious and everything, but it was what drove me to do it. I thought there was so much doesn't get the torchlight shone on it that might actually interest someone, but it was like we're investigating the nooks and crannies of South Australia.
Well, it's like there's a whole range of topics of which these ones will generate the most amount of dopamine hits and these ones won't. We don't have time for all of them. So the mass media will go for the top 20% and screw the rest. It's like you don't meet the threshold of the amount of time we've got to tell all the stories we'd like to tell. We've only got so many hours in a day, so sorry, you miss out. And you miss out forever.
And the sad thing is, yes, it's not the huge dopamine rush, but there was so much slow burn pleasure with so many topics that we covered.
In-depth interviews with people that you just don't get on any other shows or any other places where you can actually get to the real nitty-gritty of people and what's motivated them into their life stories and things, whereas even on the mainstream media, that just doesn't happen anymore. You know, there's some specialist shows on TV about things like that, but they're pretty few and far between. And they're also about famous people, not just normal people who do normal sort of jobs and things. That's not seen as exciting or worthy enough for anyone to have interest because they just are normal people. Whereas this person over here is some famous person, so therefore their life must be more interesting. It's like, I'm pretty sure they eat breakfast in the morning, lunch, and go take a crap at night. And they're probably pretty much like everyone else. But, you know, the narrative you want to convey is these are special people that lead more interesting lives. Whereas most people actually do lead pretty interesting lives anyway.
Although some of us are on a more morning ritual than an afternoon or
well, yes,
ritual when it comes to that. Just full disclosure. Look, we are in a reflective mode because it's 10 years, which is, you know, that's a long time. It's an arbitrary number, I know, but it's something that we gravitate towards.
It's the same number as the number of fingers we have on our hands.
Well, there you go. So there's something in it. Can you remember any guests who dropped something into your world that you weren't expected that has perhaps shaped you or given you pause for thought in any way, shape or form over the years? From geologists and astrophysicists.
There's just too many. That's the problem.
Yes.
It's like 250 shows I think I was involved in.
Yeah, the man who does all the Holden cars. You know, there was so many people. Does any topic... No.
All of the topics ended up being interesting in their own special way.
Even when we didn't
when you weren't thinking it was going to be an interesting topic, they actually end up being quite interesting. And that's what it sort of ties in before with, we have this idea that celebrities have exciting and interesting lives. It's only because you know about it that they're... But then lots of people you never hear about have very, very similar, interesting lives. They just don't ever... They're not in a situation where they're in the media or in the spotlight or don't want to be in the spotlight of the media.
Yeah.
And they go and do quite amazing things and never seek recognition for what they do because they just see it as this is what a normal person would do.
Yeah. One adventure I remember that has stuck with me, and I loved it because we have tried to be evidence-based in the way, you know, we have little patients.
Is it? We're going to, what's it?
The ghosts.
The ghosts at Z-Ward or whatever?
Z-Ward, the Asylum Night. Now, this was interesting because...
Did we ever tell people what happened with the technical issues on that or not?
Yeah, it was actually... In Daily did a story on it.
Oh, did they? Yeah.
So this is when we had Alison Oborn on, Osborne, from Adelaide Haunted Horizon.
Yep.
And we went to Z-Ward, just the three of us, you, me, and Alison.
Yep.
It was a wet, rainy
It was a
winter night.
A stereotypical horror movie night.
And she deliberately left most of the lights off. We just had one light in where we were working, one down the passage which went past all the cells to go to the toilet.
Yeah.
And then, and I thought, okay, neither of us necessarily believe in ghosts, and we were going to have this fascinating chat. It was interesting because the imagination was going nuts. The hair was standing up on the back of my neck often, but I thought, I tried not to show it because Nigel is Mr. Evidence. Anyway, you went upstairs by yourself to set up the camera to do our video.
Yeah.
and you got halfway up the stairs and you turned around and said, I'm not going up there.
Yeah. It's a creepy place. But
What's going on there?
it's at night, so humans are out of their comfort zone because we have crappy night vision compared to most other creatures.
Right.
Right. So humans, for a start, don't like night things.
Yep.
Because it's evolutionary wired into us. We know we're crap at seeing. We know that threats come at night that we can't see very well. We can't see our colleagues to help protect us and stuff like that. So humans are naturally a bit leery about going into dark areas. And then there's the other aspect of when humans go into an unfamiliar area, we're playing into the whole thing where humans like to have familiarity because uncertainty is normally associated with danger and threat. And so in the situation of, and it's like why people won't go, if you picked up random people off the street, threw them in a bus and said, we're going to go drop you off in a random graveyard, most people wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole because A, it's at night, or say it was at night. A, it's at night, it's a random place and different, and they're not going to be overly comfortable. And you don't feel comfortable because that's why you're a living human, because your previous ancestors who were okay with that tend to get eaten.
Is this
So just hardwired? No, it's just hardwired.
This is post hoc justification for your...
It's how all humans... I'll tell you right now, you go to some random place that's dark and go walking around, you're not going to feel comfortable there.
So it's not that we suddenly think there's ghosts, it's just that we know that we're vulnerable in that scenario.
Yeah.
And then we imagine the worst. Because I guess there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of years of programming.
Basically, yeah.
To watch out.
Yeah.
It was a great night, though.
It was a good night, yeah. And this is, it's a generally creepy place because it is open. It has high ceilings. It has lots of shadows. It's, the light sources comes from only a couple of points. So therefore you have shadows everywhere. And most humans and shadows don't mix because it's something could be in there. You don't know what's in there because it's in the shadow and things like that.
Yeah.
But, it's a generally creepy place. But then you can also go around the jail where she runs tours around as well.
Yes, Adelaide Jail.
The old Adelaide Jail. Really, really interesting and everything. I bet you it's chalk and cheese. I've only ever been around there during the daylight, I think. But I imagine it's complete chalk and cheese going around there at daylight, going around there at night. And it's not that the walls are different or the bricks are different or the floors are different or the doors are different. It's just like, now it's night time. Exactly the same place. So it's like, okay, well, what's the difference? It's now it's night. And humans are crap at night.
That actually gives heart to most of us who think we were great skeptics and then we wavered because it's actually it's a different set of thinking.
It's you're realising that your brain is doing the thing it's meant to do, which means you're going along for the ride, which is generally what your brain does because it doesn't exist to make you happy or do science or anything. Your brain exists as a way of getting your genes spread around. Yeah. And so if your genes are half inside a lion, it's not a great way to sort of have kids. Basically.
I tell you, there was no gene spreading in the Z ward that night, I can tell you.
The one I look back on I really, really can't explain is I took a couple of documentary makers around the jail. Now, they didn't believe in ghosts at all. It was my job to take them around and tell them what had been happening. And I had hedged my bets when I hedged my bets, walked into the office and said, please, if you can do it, please do it tonight type thing. Because the jail was in jeopardy of shutting down. We needed the public on side. Now, I walked into the new building and I stood on the stairs. If you've ever been into the new building, it's a T-shaped building. It's where we executed 21 people in there.
Wow.
And that's the building that all the stories were coming out of. Yep. So they were talking about a guard that was being seen during the day, and that's why we went in originally. So I'm talking about this guard, and as I'm starting to talk about him, we heard boots on the second gantry, and if you heard them now, you wouldn't be saying, was that a footstep we just heard? You could literally hear the click of the heels, the squeak of fresh leather as a foot lifted off. It came to the top of the stairs. We couldn't see anything. And I'm like standing there going, yes, like that, because their jaws dropped. And then it did something I didn't expect. It started to come down the stairs. Now, I cannot, however hard I try and rationalise this, all right, we could hear the footsteps coming down the steps.
All three of you.
Stairs. Yeah. All of us, yeah. You literally could hear that squeak of fresh leather in the boot. it walked between me and another guide that was sitting on the steps, so it would have to have been about that far away from me. Sorry. And then the two guys stepped aside because they said later they felt like an authoritative figure was coming through. And then we listened to it walking off down the hallway and out the door at the end. Now, if you ever come on my tours, I will rationalise just about everything. I will get you to think about, well, what could that be first? Let's recreate it. Let's see what it could be. And I just can't. And if you look at an interview with the guard I did, they had it when it was a working jail there as well. One of the guards talks about the same thing. So I don't know. My brain, I don't know. There was four witnesses to it. So
tell me, were the cameras running?
No, because we were doing a recce around the place. It was like, I know, it's always the way. So,
Nigel, can I get your response to this, please?
Insanity.
How do you process that story that you just heard firsthand or secondhand from Alison?
You can either take it at a straight face value, as there was actually audio coming and there was sound waves and things like that. There's also the aspect of stories change over time, and that time can be even seconds to minutes to what people said. You can also actually share an experience that someone else is having if they describe that experience as well. So that's something that's sort of odd with humans, whether it's to do with how our mirror neurons work, and that also works in the audio area as well. But basically when people can describe things or describe what something looks like, you can imagine what something looks like. So if I described, okay, there's a garden bed, there's a line of bricks around it and they're on end, there's green grass around it, there's sunflowers growing, the sky is blue. In your mind, you and I have probably got pretty much the same image of, red bricks on the end and sunflowers growing and the yellow and the green leaves and the sky's blue. And that's the thing that humans are really good at, is that communication aspect. And when we see people do things, we've got mirror neurons that enable us to learn quickly. Actually having something described to you, you can basically hear it. Because you have to remember, inside your brain, the sound waves stop at your ear. And from then on, it's only electrical signals, and it's only brain signals. And once it gets within your brain, it then gets shuffled around as well. So there's no actually sound inside your brain that stops at the start of the audio cortex. So, and we know that visually what you see, 75% roughly, is basically put there by your brain, and it doesn't actually exist in the real world because it's just a way of optimizing brain power. It doesn't bother filling in stuff that isn't relevant at this point in time. The same thing happens with audio as well. It happens with all of our senses as well, because the problem with the brain is it uses heaps and heaps of energy, and evolution will select for behaviours that suit the environment. And if it's a matter of being able to share an idea without having to actually have the same idea or share the same sound, it's a benefit. So humans are very good at hearing things when someone describes them. If someone describes a beat to you of a song, you can hear it in your head without them the song. If you describe something visually, you can see that image, most people.
But in this case, the way I'm picking up this story, Alison, you all would have looked at each other at the same time.
Well, see, that's the thing.
We were in silence.
Yeah.
We were so shocked.
One of the four people would have heard it first.
Yeah,
because even if it was a real sound walking along...
We pretty much heard it all together.
Yeah.
We just all looked at each other and it was like, not a word was said. It was just like...
Because it could have been you first heard some sound of something, and there was an actual real physical sound. And if it starts having a repetition to footsteps, your brain will make it into footsteps, whether that physically sounds like that or not. But then if you say it or look at one another, just the act of looking is going to start reinforcing that you're hearing things.
I would agree with that.
It's just really, you can, and the problem with the human brain is you can never know.
It became that close. Yeah. And it wasn't like it was off in the distance. It was that close. And, like you say, the brain changes things. And it was about 8 years ago. And during that time, I'm thinking, did I really hear that quite like I heard it? And then somebody bought my book the other day. She's an indie horror movie. She's not making a movie, but she put it up on her Facebook page. And somebody came in and said, we're in that book. And I went, is that the documentary maker? Because we lost touch with them. Yeah. And I went, is that you? And he goes, yeah, we were the ones there that night. And I said, I didn't say a word. I said, did we hear what we heard? And that's all I said. And he went, Yeah, he said that was the freakiest night of our life.
And the other interesting thing that happened with that is, mysteriously, and I still cannot explain it, halfway through the night, the recording stopped.
Yep.
Everything kept running, but the recording stopped.
Yep. Yeah, that was the weird thing about it. Is for some reason there was a technical glitch that we never got to the bottom of. Because the problem is, we were concerned that there's an issue with equipment.
Yes,
and that could have just been the first week it happened, and for all we knew, there was a memory issue or something weird with the recorder. And we do the next podcast next week, and it's like, what happens if the podcast stops recording at some random point through, and we start losing material and stuff like that? So, in the back of our minds was like, well, that's really weird. Hopefully it was a random thing, and it isn't, something's going wrong with the equipment.
Well, I couldn't trust it, so what I did is the next day, the unit I'm using now is the one I bought within 2 days of that episode. I just couldn't risk it.
Yeah.
Because there was nothing that explained it other than leaping to ghosts.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like, every piece of machinery starts off, there's a day something works, but your car, your washing machine or whatever, and then at some point in the future there's a day it doesn't work. Like every bit of technology we make goes through that phase. So the problem we have is, you thrash that thing.
Yes.
And, the recorder as well. And so...
First part of the night. First innuendo.
First innuendo. And so it's like, okay, we set everything up the same way. We have that ritual that we go through to make sure you don't make mistakes, you don't leave things out, and you don't leave cables behind and everything. And we always would go through the same ritual and setting up the equipment and plugging things in a certain way and checking everything completely. And that night was no different from any other night, where we'd get out the equipment, get out the case, set up the things, plug in the mics, do everything the same way, check everything, do our same sound level check we do every night, which we did tonight, and we still do. And yet, for some reason, on that night, the machine stopped halfway through. And it's like, well, it'd be great if a ghost just walked in the room and said, "Hey, Punji guys, sucks to be you. Yeah, we exist." And walked off. It's like, oh, cool, that's great. It wasn't the equipment after all. That'd be quite reassuring from the equipment point of view. But it was like, no, we didn't do anything different on that particular night.
And you make a good point, actually. If my washing machine stopped working, I wouldn't say, oh, it must be a ghost, would I?
Yeah.
Because that's ghost in the machine.
But what happens if it was a stormy night and it was lightning outside or something?
Well, then I'd be thinking electrical surge of some sort.
And it could just be breaking down.
Oh, my God.
Stopping anyway.
It was actually, I wonder if I don't think there was lightning that night, but an electrical surge could have been. I mean, we were plugged into really old electrical equipment.
Piece of rubbish, the wiring in that place, going in there like you don't get electrocuted.
So it actually could have been a pulse that came through the system.
It could have been anything, because if we think of all the places we've recorded in, it's probably one of the oldest from infrastructure and wiring, and most places are a lot more recent we've been in than that. So who knows what happened anyway. We'll blame the ghosts.
We will.
I am Dalek Mac from the Adelaide Dalek Builders Union. Keep listening to the Adelaide Show, or you will be exterminated. Exterminate! Exterminate! Exterminate!
Talking of places, we did do a few road trips as part of the Adelaide Show podcast. I remember we had a great day up at Mannum. We got up really early. They had a Mannum gaming expo.
Ah, yeah.
And there were
The medieval dudes were there.
The medieval dudes were there. The ones where you got little toys, little toy humans. What's that, Warcraft or something? Where they?
Oh, the miniatures.
Yes, the
miniature
miniatures.
bells were up there as well, yeah.
There was a game of Quidditch.
Yeah, that was the Harry Potter thing. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we had the Quidditch club doing their game of Quidditch on the Oval and everything.
That was an interesting little jaunt, because I figured that was more in your world, wasn't it? Because you're a nerd when it comes to games, aren't you, Nigel? You love your board games
I do like
and
board
strategy.
Games, yeah. So, and like SCA, Society of Creative Activism, they've been around since I was at uni in the 80s. They were around from before then as well.
Okay.
So I knew people who were in it and who kept on running it for decades afterwards, who were friends at uni and things. So I've known about that for ages, and then I've seen it get to the stage where they could actually have medieval fairs up in the hills and stuff like that. So I've seen that develop over the decades for that and everything. And then the Harry Potter, obviously I had kids at the time, and like my son had to get the Harry Potter book as soon as it came out. So we were many mornings lined up in Rundle Mall at a, quote, bookstore, things our listeners might not know about anymore.
Yes.
There's not many left. And, to get the first version of the Harry Potter books and everything like that. So he was totally into that and got all of the books as they came out because he's, under 10 at the time and loved it. So, that was the time when, the Quidditch thing was all new and everything.
We have Danny and Kirsty from the SA Quidditch Association. I always want to say Kidditch, and that's wrong, isn't it?
It is. Kidditch is for children under 14.
Oh, there is actually a Kidditch?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm ahead of my time. Wow. Now, we just watched you play Quidditch.
Yes.
And I deliberately, before today, did not rewatch any Harry Potter. In fact, I can only remember snatches of the game when I saw it 10 years ago. I wanted to come in as ignorant as possible. And I think I've managed that pretty well. But I was noticing things during the game of things of nuance.
There's 3 or 4 different games, I guess, going within a game is probably the best way to explain it. So
What are they?
Well, you've got your basketball, netball style game where you're trying to score goals through the hoops.
There's 3 hoops at either end.
Yep.
One a little bit higher than the other 2.
Yeah, they differ in height and so forth.
Yeah. Right.
And you get 10 points if you score a goal through the hoops. The next game is a bludger beater game. And so this is where you've got dodgeballs.
Are they the pink balls?
They're the pink balls. Oh, they were pink for us. But,
they can
be any colour.
Yeah.
And I noticed that on the teams, they did have different colour headbands, and only those with the black headbands today were the ones who could have the bludger
Well
balls.
done, yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, that's good picking up.
So what are they doing with this ball?
So when you throw a bludger at somebody, if you hit them, they then need to dismount off their broom, run back to their goals, touch the goals, then they can get back on their broom. So it takes them out of the game for a moment or two.
And are the bludgers, that's what they're called, isn't it?
Yes.
Are they, when they throw the ball, are they going for any players on the other side or only a certain type of player on the other side?
No, they can go for anyone.
Right. Even if you don't have the ball, because a lot of them are going to people with the ball, with the white ball, which is that the snitch?
No, that's a quaffle.
A what, sorry?
The quaffle.
Quaffle.
That's the main one that you score the goals with.
That's right. And the game starts when you toss your quaffle. Is that right? Is that how they... And my daughters, by the way, have both read through the books, probably twice each. It was interesting, isn't it? Because I haven't read the books. I think they'd be too scary.
I've got through, about 2/3 of the way through. I think I missed the last 2 when my son got them or something. I wasn't into it as much then, but it was interesting because she was a newer writer. She was writing in fantasy had been around for ages, and like Lord of the Rings had been done to death by then, and The Hobbit had been done to death as well. And so, and a lot of the good writers, Ursula Le Guin and people like that, never really got round to getting their books made into movies or anything like that, even though they're absolutely fantastic writers. And then to actually have fantasy becoming a, acceptable thing to read, become mainstream, was quite novel from that point of view. Because like you say, it was very sort of nerdy to be into fantasy stuff back then, but then the big, and
they were well-made movies. They really did a great job. Seriously.
Yeah, and the CGI, that was really, at the time, cutting-edge CGI, all the big battles and everything like that.
And typically it just worked well. There weren't cringe moments in that movie.
Yeah, it was a typical hero narrative, and it was done competently.
Yeah.
And, the script was pretty much written for them, because Tolkien had already written it all out anyway, and the plot had already been proven to be accepted because it was a huge hit book anyway. So it's not like, are the people going to like the plot? It's like, no, we already know they like the plot. It's just, can we competently make it a decent movie? And
they probably could have done it in bare minimalism, and it would have been okay as well.
Well, there was the rotoscope version back in the 70s of the first book of Lord of the Rings. That was a bit of a flop at the time.
The rotoscope?
Rotoscope, yeah. It's a technique they use where they take images and then they convert them into hand-drawn, sort of like
cartoon?
Cartoony
anime.
style, yeah. Oh. And it's not used very much. One of P.K. Dick's books was converted into rotoscope. And that also wasn't a success about 30 years after that. So it's not a popular technique these days. But that was a complete flop, the 1970s Lord of the Rings, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. But you see, I don't think the Lord of the Rings, the modern ones, they bored me senseless.
Return of the King, kill me now, please.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is.
It was just self-indulgent, meandering. And your brain just turns off when you go into the mass war scenes because, okay, they're just going to do all the CGI for the next 20 minutes and we'll come back. And there were moments that were good, don't get me wrong. But gee whiz.
It relied heavily on the CGI to carry it.
Yeah,
and it could carry itself just through plot and character.
Yeah,
but
they could have been a bit shorter. They didn't need every blow of every battle scene for crying out loud.
And the way they got worse and longer as they went through the series was, I don't think, a great director's idea.
No. Now, talking of books, though, there was a great trip we had. It was just a nighttime trip. We went to a little pub up on the hills overlooking Adelaide, and we sat down with 3 romance writers. Now, that was a complete change of scene. That was absolutely hilarious, learning how to write romance. Did it improve your love life?
No.
Okay. So
no, sorry.
I think when I was reading the book that I knew my wife had just read, and we met that country boy who was a hunk, I thought, my wife's reading him right now and thinking, yes, that is delicious. And so I instantly hated him. So,
did you like the heroine? Did you like her?
Look, I think even though she had to take the sports car, that's not a bad thing. Yeah, she was all right. Why? Did I just...
You can edit this thing.
Is that called hypocrisy, is it?
Yeah. How did your wife feel about you fancying the heroine?
Oh, I only fancied her from purely an academic position.
I'm sure your wife was totally the same.
Remember, Steve, you can totally edit this to whatever you want to say here.
No, I'm beyond editing now.
You can edit out the honesty if you want.
Tonight's episode, I want to be as authentic and as transparent as possible. It's too important. Romance is too important.
In Stone Castles, you really just noticed she was driving a sports car. This is why you're a guy.
It was red, wasn't it?
It was,
And what model was it? It was...
an Audi.
There you go.
Yeah, see, boys with cars.
No, but I'm not a car person. I just remembered it. Do you know what? I remember reading it thinking, why is she mentioning Audi all the time? Is she sponsored by Audi? That's what I thought.
Wouldn't that be clever product placement? I'm still waiting for the call.
Whereas I would have been happy with a little S4 Volvo. I reckon that would have been lovely.
Well, she wanted a Toyota.
Did want something.
She wanted that.
Yes,
she was
that
very
bloke
frustrated.
Over in New York did the wrong thing by her.
What colour was her hair?
Did she have hair? Yes, she had hair.
She had hair.
And it wasn't red because...
I'm just pointing out the difference between a man reading a romance novel and a woman, and not all men, because that would be nasty to all men, but...
just me.
The fact that you think your wife was salivating over the delicious hero, and he was delicious, but all you took away from it was the car.
Yeah,
may I suggest that you go back... No, I'm not trying to know. Yeah.
I'll save you. Did you like the dog?
Top Gear.
Was there a dog?
Turbo the dog.
Turbo, his dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, no interest.
No interest.
Well, that's a relief.
But I'm not a dog man. I'm more into pussy like cats. I'm more of a cat man.
Right.
Thank you for not saying what you're about to say.
And so with her, she had a sports car and she had a coffee. She grabbed a coffee. The thing that I didn't understand is she didn't drink it for about 17 pages and it went cold and she was surprised.
Well, she had a lot on her mind.
She had a dying person.
Yeah, as well.
When I do that, I make cups of coffee and sit there at my desk and then pick it up and it's cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. To me, the most important things in life are the perfect espresso. Do you think... Here's a question. If you were going to cast me as a hero, how would you describe... What sort of traits do you think I could carry off in a novel? You can be blunt, because I can edit this.
Dark.
Dark.
I can't see if you're tall because you've only been sitting down.
Right.
A deep voice.
I would have said voice.
voice.
I would have said voice as well.
Yep.
And brown eyes.
Yep.
I think we'd go caramel
Hazel.
chocolate, I think.
Caramel chocolate.
Maybe kind of Haig's peppermint frog. Brown eyes.
That sounds manly. He was tall, dark, with Haig's peppermint chocolate eyes.
No, women get that, believe me.
Oh, do they?
What?
Just like the chocolate wine.
Right.
The chocolate in the wine.
But good with technology. You could be, you know,
Yes.
IT hero.
So there's hope for me yet.
Okay, I know.
So you also listen, which is very important in the heroes.
Listen.
Oh, yeah. A lot of heroes, well, a lot of guys don't listen.
Don't listen. But
Yeah.
heroes listen. I think there's a subtitle for tonight's program.
I've got it.
Okay.
I reckon your heroine, she would be a radio announcer, and she has perhaps been dumped that morning by a guy that she thought she was going to marry, and she's completely losing her shit, and you're the, I don't know what the technical word is, but the sound guy behind the scenes, and you have to take over the mic while she loses her shit, and you save her, and then she really sees you
and then you really
as a
see
hero.
her. Oh no, you've always seen her.
We were in her point of view when we opened, and
I
she
was invisible.
And no, because that's the truth. I don't think the hero is ever necessarily invisible. Usually, he's a pain in the ass at first. And he can be kind of annoying. So maybe you messed up her coffee, and she just thinks, "Oh my God, Steve, get my latte right."
Mm-hmm.
But then you save her in her moment of, meltdown.
I'm there with my finger on her fader, and I bring her.
That's the title. Finger on her fade out.
Wow.
His finger on her fade out. It's beautiful. That's poetry.
Right. And we'll call the book Love FM.
My God, I just tingled.
I remember you and I went to the gentleman's before we headed off, and we looked at each other, and we said, "This is what makes it worthwhile." This was a great. I'm not urinating together. I mean, that night, those women were fantastic.
It was something different we wouldn't normally have done, and if it wasn't for the podcast, we would never have met them. More than likely, I don't think at all.
No.
And like many of the shows, it's where you go into it thinking, I wonder what this is going to be like. And then it's like, oh no, that was actually exceeded my expectations, which was generally happened most of the time.
Yeah.
You think, oh yeah, well, it's an interesting thing Steve's come up with here, we'll see how it goes. And then you find out, actually no, most people actually have really interesting stories.
There's something, just as a sidestep from the podcast itself, I think there's something we can take away from that in life. How many interesting engagements are there that we have access to that we just don't explore?
Oh, yeah.
When you think about it, from our little experience doing this, it makes me think, how many people have I not taken time to sit down and suck the marrow out of their story? Yeah,
well, like, Naka, it was, I did 250-odd episodes with it, and I wouldn't normally have interacted with those people in my normal day-to-day life, I don't think. There's hardly any I knew before we did the episode, from memory.
No. There were one or two, but
yeah, very few and far between. So, the vast bulk of, 98% of those people were complete strangers in areas I'd normally have no dealings with whatsoever and never need to for that point of view. And that'll be the same with everyone who listens to this show is they would never normally meet the sort of people who would interview in your normal life unless you were specifically going out looking for people to meet, which most people don't do. You have your group of friends, you have your routines you go through the day, and you won't get to talk to someone that runs, you won't generally get to talk to an artist or someone who does, runs a costume shop. Yes, you might go there to hire a costume, but you won't actually think a moment about the person who actually runs it, or they used to be a ballet dancer or something, or you won't think about the artist that used to be someone else, or, just the variety of people, you crossed who had previous and different lives. And unless you happen to specifically nail them down and say, tell me your life, you'd never know.
No. Peter Drew, the artist.
Oh, yeah.
You and he talked me into graffitiing on a building.
Yep.
We illegally put up a bill poster.
Yep, sure did.
And it was up there for ages. People were sharing photos of it on social media.
Yeah. Yeah, and he was one of the few people I'd already known before because I'd done a course on stencil art, not a course, but a workshop on doing stencil art and stuff like that.
There you go.
And so, and that was literally something I would never have normally done, but for whatever situation, a random event is it's one of those sliding doors moments where someone said, oh, come along to this street art party thing that was happening at the time, and it was the dumpster biennial where the local street artists at the time every 2 years would get some dumpsters and then spray paint them and stuff. So went along to that, and a mate and I got involved in that. And then from that, there was a show coming up, had some street art and stuff, and we were both into photography, so we were photographing it anyway. And then, I got into doing the street art and stencil work and stuff like that, of which I've still got, some of those posters still ready to go up 10 years later. And during the time, Peter Drew was the guy who was running the workshop on how to do stencil art.
And then you would have been the one who got us in to have that session with him.
I have nostalgia for a time when art had more authority and status, whereas these days art is more of a subculture in comparison to mass culture in a lot of ways. Whereas once it was art was the dominant culture. If you wanted to show someone an idea, you'd have to pull out a pencil. Whereas now people just use their iPhone, and you don't have to be an artist to do that.
Or wouldn't you argue that everyone's an artist then?
I know, but that does diminish the stature or the status of something that everyone can do at the drop of a hat.
Instagram isn't art.
Yeah.
Should we describe Peter's face? Talk to that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously, art these days can be everything because it's the parameters for what art, for the way we value art, have been deliberately diminished by art itself. It's sort of questioned itself to the point that art can be absolutely anything. But the price of that is the status of art is diminished. It used to be that art was an elite culture which would sort of trickle down, whereas now art is a subculture. I use the analogy that art is to culture what luxury yachts are to transportation. It's just a little bubble that doesn't really affect anything else.
It adorns life rather than informs or challenges or disrupts
or directs it. It used to be that art was sitting right on top of culture, it was a pinnacle, whereas now it's just sort of a sideshow.
Dumpsters do revolve around your life a little bit. Do you remember we had an
dumpster
episode,
diving?
Yeah, we went dumpster diving with Mel Haynes. He took us out, and we did it. We went to an Audi dumpster near the airport, and we came home with
goodies,
salamis, yogurt, all sorts of food that was out there in the dumpster, but was safe to eat.
It's interesting because that was a lot of years now ago. But the weird thing is, food waste is still a massive issue, and it still isn't being addressed. And even the other day, on the news headlines, there was something about, something about dumpster diving. I thought, that's right, that's still a thing, where we're throwing out so much good stuff. And I used to live next to one of the petrol stations that won't be named, who are very common all through this state and spreading interstate like some out of control virus.
Yes,
and I'd occasionally, because I lived over the road from them, when I was getting my milk there or something we would run out of, I'd walk through, and if the gate was open, I'd just have a peek in. Because of the episode, I'd have a peek into the dumpster and just see what were they actually throwing out. And it was just, sometimes it was like, this is really wrong. This is horrendous to live in a society where we don't have a system in place for using up things before they get out of date, or a predictive way of checking the stock better so you can do something with it before it goes to waste. And it was just like, as Mel pointed out, it's generally perfectly good food.
Yeah.
Just because it's met some date on it, which is typically a best before date anyway, and it doesn't actually really go off. It's like, we really need to get our act together on, having resource management to be a lot better.
And as we said on that episode, and we'll say again, the stuff that's safe to take out of those bins is the stuff with the best before as opposed to use by.
But even the use by is conservative, because they don't want to run the risk of the 1 in 100 that happen to go off a bit quicker because of whatever.
Yeah.
And so there'll always be a huge margin of safety and all of that. But the fact that in this day and age with computer-controlled everything and computer inventories and barcodes, we can't actually have the right amount of stuff in the right place at the right time. And the year's 2023, it beggars belief about. So it's just easier to throw good stuff out than fix the problem.
And I was thinking there could be a smart way for the retailer to connect with me through my loyalty card, because they've seen I've bought it before, and their inventory could tell them that they've got some that's short-dated. Hey, Steve, would you like one of these for 50 cents?
Yeah, half price.
But then they get half price for that. However, I'm sure when they throw that out, they get a refund in full from the manufacturer or the provider.
Could be.
And so there'll be a disincentive.
To do the right thing.
To do the right thing. A couple other quick trips that we had. Neither of them were quick. Mount Gambier.
That was a good trip.
We went to Cafe Pergiorno.
Yep, and I've been there since.
Yeah, it's great. And Maria.
Yep.
Wonderful.
And daughters.
And the daughters, they made the Adelaide Show pizza, which was on their menu for years. And I think you can still ask for it if you want to. Half and half.
Yep.
If you're going to start throwing some ingredients together, are there some little shortcuts
that you know are going to work, or that will actually not work as much as you must love certain things?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not actually a pizza maker, but been watching all these years, start off with the red, white and green.
Oh, red, white and green.
Yes. Which is your sauce.
Yes.
Tomato, your bocconcini or mozzarella, and basil. And then think about what you like. 3 more things that you like. Spinach, sun-dried tomatoes, you name it. Throw it all together. Salt, pepper, olive oil, put in the oven.
I love it. I'm coming to you, Walter, but just before I come to you...
I'm not a pizza maker.
Just before I come to you, because you spend a lot of time near that oven.
I do, a little bit.
Maria, tonight there's one thing that you did to me that has never been done to me before, and you've changed my life. And
Thank you.
It was when you encouraged me to eat pizza with anchovy.
And you loved it.
And I did. So why did I like your anchovy but not in the past when I've had it? What is the difference?
Because the pizza or the schiacciata
That's right.
Walter has created has a balance of the cheese. No, it's actually bocconcini. It's Kalamata olives. So if you think about all those flavours and a touch of the anchovy, which Nigel loves.
Yes. Don't drive a wedge between us.
And once it's put in the wood-fired oven, it gets a smoky texture to it. And you had a little bit of Magella musician wine with it.
I did.
And you have the perfect balance.
So did I drown it out, or did I just balance it? Is that what?
No, you needed the salt content in the anchovy to finish off the
All right.
taste.
Well, there you go. It was I had my first time here, and it was magnificent. Walt, so I shouldn't be talking like that in front of you, should I, Walt?
No, that's I'm fine.
What do you think with your wise head when it comes to balancing a pizza? Because I know I actually went to Venice and Trieste many, many years ago. The pizza there is very different. They have almost like some ingredients in one corner, some in another, some in... It's not the whole even spread like we do down here.
Can I interrupt for a moment? North and South Italy,
yes,
don't see eye to eye.
Right.
You've hit a note.
Have I?
You've hit a note.
Are you two both from the same end?
Well, he's Naples.
Naples.
The world's best pizzas.
Yes, they also are renowned for lots of things.
And I'm from the world's best
stick
pasta.
to the pizzas.
Molisano.
And you're from which part?
The world's best pasta, I believe.
Okay.
Molisano.
So
northern pizzas are nothing compared to the south.
My half was magnificent and your half was polluted with anchovy.
Yes, correct. Yes, some of us do have decent tasters. Some people just haven't learned the magic ingredient that most restaurants use. And here's a free trade secret for listeners to the podcast.
Yes.
On savoury foods.
Yep.
Mince up a couple of anchovies and throw them in the food.
Why?
Because that is what turns your normal food into award-winning food.
Is that umami flavour that it brings?
The umami flavour, that rich, savoury flavour you get out of those, plus the salt as well, which all humans like anyway. So, I'd learned that. Actually, after that show, I'd stumbled across that little fact that it's one of the secrets to good recipe. Some of the best restaurants in the world, their secret ingredient is typically
I'll grant you,
fish.
If it's sort of blended into a savoury dish, it will enhance it.
You can't taste it.
No, but it
directly.
ruins pizza. It ruins pizza.
No, I'm afraid not.
Yeah, I'd much rather have a plantation worth of pineapple on my pizza than one scale.
Wait a sec. Wait. So you're actually... I guess we'll have to run some vote on this. You're saying that pineapple is an okay topping for pizza?
Absolutely.
Well, there we go. I rest my case. I think the debate is all over Red Rover. We'll let our listeners judge on who's got the best taste of pizza toppings at that point in time.
Another trip was Renmark. We had an overnight stay in Renmark and 2 full day, chock-a-block days. We ate yabbies that had been freshly caught from the River Murray. We did art.
We were involved in cooking the yabbies or something, weren't we?
Yeah, we were. We were cooking out in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Yep. What else did we? We drank whiskey and gin at the distillery there.
Yep.
We did speedboat racing out on the river. We went kayaking.
Yep. Yeah, and the gin distillery is still going.
It's good, isn't it?
Even though this week, I think it is, the excise is now going up to, it's over $100 a litre for ethanol now. I noticed the people complaining about it, because remember, part of it was, why do we even have excise? How does it work?
Yes.
It's all kept under lock and key. And yeah, when I saw the headline come through, yeah, I remember the story about that, where we actually got to the bottom of why is alcohol in Australia the third most expensive on the planet. And it's because of our excise laws, which I learned this week are actually tied into the CPI.
Oh, so they'll just keep going up?
So, and the CPI at the moment is not close to zero. Right. So there's a huge hit happening on the excise of your ethanol or spirit-based products, because it's not just ethanol, because that's when we discovered, things like beer and wine treated separately from spirit-based products.
Yes, and the spirit has a higher concentration, of course. So.
Oh, yeah, but literally beer doesn't get the excise.
No. There you go, mate, because it's Australia.
Australia, mate.
You're listening to another boring Thursday night in Adelaide.
Given that you tend to approach things in a thoughtful way, how have you prepared yourself and geared up for retirement? Has anything shaken loose from it that could be something for others to ponder if they're...
Well, weirdly, I'm a victim of COVID.
Oh.
When COVID hit, suddenly my employer had to take a 10% cut to everything they did, because they were part of the organisation that funds most things in Australia, aka the government.
Yeah.
And they said, we need to make cuts across the board. And so they said, okay, who wants to go? So I semi-jokingly said, yeah, I'll go. And then they said, yes. So it wasn't an expected plan. But, yeah, so it was earlier than expected. I wasn't expecting to be retiring until about now, but this was 2.5 years ago.
Yep.
So, it's just lucky being in a privileged position of not having to scrounge and fight for work. But in the meantime, I've changed career again. So,
but did you have a period where there wasn't anything pressing that you had to do? How do you stop from going nuts? Because to me, that is a nightmare. To think that there is nothing that I have to do is existentially terrifying.
I have never been so busy in my entire life since I retired. I have no idea.
Yeah, I hear people say
how
that.
I ever got the time to work.
But everyone says that who's retired. What is it?
It's just you get so the number of things I haven't done since quote retiring is ridiculous.
Fixing things.
I know I haven't done like woodworking in 2 years. I haven't done my print art in 1.5 years. Like the last print art 2 years ago now was when I made some art for the previous house and everything. And I did that because we needed some extra artworks for selling the place. But since then, I literally haven't had a spare hour to sit down and do an hour's worth of art or anything.
Why not?
It's just too busy doing everything else.
What's in everything else?
Oh, just all the other things I do in life.
Which is? It's very elusive, Nigel.
Cooking, a lot more cooking, do a lot more, like I do cartography now as well, which is time-consuming as sort of a part-time job thing. I manage a heritage property now, which is time-consuming, especially as I've got to go back to study full-time for a year to learn, to get the skills to know how to do that. So I've got that to do, the assignments to do with that as well. And then there's the whole life trying to do more exercise and things, which we can barely get enough time to do it anymore. So it's just, the work seems to come out of the bloody woodwork.
So there's no secret bullet. There's no magic bullet. You can't teach us how to do retirement well.
I'd tend to say do it sooner rather than later. And especially if you don't enjoy your work, just don't bother doing it, because you only get one life. And why waste time? If you're getting lots of money and you think that's it, trust me, at some point it's not that important. It gets less important. And all the research shows that as well. People also generally get happier the older they get, where in theory they're not getting the prestige, they're not getting the big pay, they're not getting the shiny job and everything like that. In theory, people should be not as happy. And yet whenever we do research in the area, we find people's happiness only increases after they've retired as well. So there's something in there that we haven't quite put our fingers on of, what makes for a happy life and everything like that. So, and getting out of the rat race, not having to deal with people you don't like dealing with is probably a key benefit as well.
I'm glad you made an exception tonight.
Yeah, well, sometimes we still have to do it.
And I should just say, Nigel did bring 4 pumpkins for me tonight. So are they the fruits of retirement?
Yes, they are the fruits of retirement. They're the lesser-known tree pumpkins.
Yeah, they
grow in trees.
Are they like drop bears?
You wouldn't want to be underneath it when they drop.
No, they're pretty heavy.
They're solid as well, yeah.
Now, the last thing was, is it news? Because, seriously, Nigel, I loved our time working together on the Adelaide Show. And a big part of that was having some time with you. And one thing you brought every week, I probably did set up most of the interviews, but you did a good whack of research so that we had the interview with the guest, and then you would come up with 3 news stories, 2 real, 1 fake.
That were relevant to the person we were interviewing as well.
On topic.
They were totally on topic.
And then the guest and I did our best to try and determine which one was the fake, and it wasn't a fait accompli that we'd get it right.
No, I think the long-term trend, I think, was you got about average. You might as well just guessed.
No, I beat you ultimately.
Really?
Yeah, no.
Do you have the numbers? No, I don't think so.
Just, I thought we uncovered more gold from our guests and from topics by doing this. What was the dynamic of these? What do you think made it? And a lot of people loved that segment. What do you think made it work?
It's interesting because it wasn't planned to do that. It was sort of just a little puzzly thing we do at the end. But what we noticed over the years was it actually ended up, because it was semi-random, the stories were on topic but random, and also historically way before anyone was around. So it's not like, I can't really say anything about that. If it was a recent story, you could easily have a guess at, no, I'd rather not comment on something contemporary. None of these stories were more recent, about 1954, because thanks to the federal government not funding the archiving of important material in Australia, we don't have a lot of newspapers in South Australia after 1954 archived. Thank you, federal government, regardless of who you are. Neither of you have done a good job. Boo.
This is how I know it is the real Nigel Dobson, because I knew that there would be a red rag to the bull, and the trove bitterness would come through, the fact that funding was ripped from it as it was trying to digitise all the newspapers.
Yeah, and I guess most people don't think history is important because it never repeats. Lol. And but I think that the real strength from it came. You suddenly have a guest who was. They'd been through most of the interview and they'd had a deal with you, Steve, and managed to keep you under control and everything. And then there was sort of a little bit of a whimsical. All the stories were chosen to be entertaining, primarily, and not too serious. There was always a funny edge to them, and they were always try to be chosen for their absurdity to some degree. And then the one I'd make up was tried to match as best as I could the writing style of either the 1850s versus the 1950s, which is chalk and bloody cheese on what words to use and everything. So there's a whole knack in trying to get that. But I think, some of the really good comments and bits we got from our guests came out of when we'd read out one story, talk about it, it would tend to then get pulled back into what we're interviewing them about and some present day stories. Then the next story would come out, we'd talk about that. And then the third story would come out. And then there'd generally be a lot more discussion about, well, which one do you think it is? And that would sort of really start bringing out from the guests, because they're relaxed by then. It wasn't the real serious thing about them. It was about something related to them that they could understand to some degree.
I think it was the dynamic of them having license in it. We create a trust circle between us to play with their field of expertise.
Yeah, and I think the Is It News gave people, the opportunity to still be knowledgeable about something with absolutely no consequences for getting it wrong, because the stories are only vaguely in their area, and sometimes it's quite hard to find really relevant things.
And the one I remember most, and I forget the details, but it was the original generation of Mr. Downer and Mr. Barr Smith.
Driving down. It's one I remember as well.
Were they in the same car? And
they're in the same car coming down from the hills where Downer property was with the cherry farm, and they had a collision with the cart coming from the South Australian Bank. News! Which brings us to the time of the week where we go to Is It News? We go through 3 news stories from time well past the date. That's why I have it in a little wrap, Steve, so you can't see the dates. And we have 3 stories taken from our newspapers, 2 of which are true and 1 of which is incorrect.
And the topic this week?
The topic this week is transport accidents.
Dun, dun.
Joyful. Joyful.
So,
you're the light, fluffy one.
They're not all bad. We'll start off with a good story.
Okay.
So this is from the Advertiser, the 19th of May, 1925. A train disaster narrowly averted. Remarkable accident at Wollonga. Czech rail prevents a terrible crash. And here's the story. The passengers and attendants on the 9:30am train from Adelaide to Wollonga had a remarkable escape from almost certain death yesterday morning. As the train was entering a cutting approaching Pedlar's Creek Bridge, the engine left the line, travelled on the permanent way across the bridge and finally ran into the face of the cutting on the other side. But for the check rails on the bridge, which kept the engine to a fairly straight course, the train would have crashed into the creek 50 feet below.
Oh, wow.
So basically it derailed on one side of the bridge, crossed over the narrow bridge and made it all the way over.
Now, when Nigel started saying the train from Adelaide to Wollonga, I thought, wouldn't it be lovely to be able to catch the train to Wollonga? Because I don't think we can do that now, can we?
Seaford?
No.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking...
It's on the old line that is now a bikeway, I think.
Yeah.
Part of the way.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it would have been a journey to certain death would have been how they would have... attention, a journey to certain death, departing in 3 minutes, platform 2. Wow. That would have been harrowing. What do we think, gentlemen? Is this plausible or is this not plausible? Because we have to find the fake in what he's offering.
Do we get to listen to all 3 first?
We do.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. That's good. That's
Oh, that's very wise of you, Craig.
Yeah.
I like having people eat their words later.
Yes.
We do get to hear a bit more later. He'll cycle through twice.
Right.
Cycle being a lovely pun for our transport program. Lee,
Oh, look, my immediate thoughts have gone to how many people are living down in Wollonga in 1927 and needing to catch the train. And
But if I think of my days raising my girls on my knee watching Thomas the Tank Engine, often there are railway lines that take you to holiday to little pastime destinations.
Yep. Seaside holidays.
The island of Sodor.
Yeah, that's right. On the island of Sodor. It's 2,
which
it's 4,
definitely
it's 6, it's 8. Yes. Shunting seal. Anyway, go on.
Okay, so there's the first one of the Sodor stories. The next one we have now, so you need to pay attention to this one.
Okay.
This is from the Register, the 28th of February, 1903. Fatal motor car accident. Mr. Frank Burden, the well-known motor manufacturer of Grenfell Street, met with a tragic accident on Friday night. He'd been visiting friends at Norwood and was returning to the city when he collided with a spring dray driven by Mr. S.H. Nichols of King William Street in front of Prince Alfred College. Mr. Burden was thrown heavily to the ground and Mr. Nichols, on finding that he was injured, at once conveyed him to Adelaide Hospital. Dr. Mooker was in attendance and found that the sufferer had fractured 3 ribs, had a minor skull fracture, in addition to being severely shaken.
1903.
Not many cars around in 1903. Fairly significant event.
And not only not many cars, but this sufferer was a car manufacturer.
So my recollection of cars in 1903 was most of them were imported.
Were you around there?
No. Recollection of a book I read. Most cars were imported at that stage, and actually, interestingly, what I think I remember is that you bought the chassis and the engine, and you tended to find someone who could
coach builder.
Form a car around this chassis and engine.
Right.
So
because Henry Ford hadn't started at that point. He was 1917 or something, wasn't
around
he?
there, yeah. So that's an interesting one.
The other thing is, how far... They wouldn't have gone that fast. He just collided into a dray. I mean, for crying out loud. He'd have his seatbelt on.
Airbags would have stopped him coming out.
Or wheat bags.
Yeah, I suppose. Even if you were doing
the equivalent of 30 kilometres an hour, doing that without a seatbelt.
His goggles must have been fogged up.
Yes, his goggles fogged up. Oh, by James, is that a horse? I just did that accent because it was out the front of Prince Alfred College. Right. All right, none of us are willing to commit on that one just yet.
No. Cautious.
We have another one from the Register, the 2nd of January 1905, motor car accident. Our Woodside correspondent writes, a Mr. A. Lorimer, manager of the Bank of Adelaide at Woodside, when returning from the Mount Torrens agency this afternoon, had a narrow escape from a serious accident. Mr. Lorimer had stopped his trap on the road near Charleston to speak to a customer when he heard the hoot of a motor car behind. He was on his right side, but to allow plenty of room, was about to pull further aside. The driver of the motor evidently made a little miscalculation, for he crashed into the trap, catching it just inside the back wheel. The effect of the impact was sufficient to throw a boy who was accompanying Mr. Lorimer out of the vehicle. We'll leave it at that point in that story.
I'd have to question the level of driving instructors back then. Because it sounds to me like people just basically sat in these things and turned the engine on and tally ho, old chap, we'll see where it gets us. How can you crash into some, like...
That one's reminding me of is it the frog in Wind in the Willows the toad. The toad, yes. The toad, yeah. Driving recklessly through the countryside.
There's another book I must read.
Yeah?
Yeah, I've never read it.
Okay.
Thoughts, we've heard all three of them now. We're about to get a bit more of each one, but I do need your preliminary feeling on which one is the least plausible of the three stories.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the middle one rather than the last one. Bank manager in the hills. Yeah, that seems plausible. But I think the discussion we had around the manufacturing has swayed me.
Yep. I think the middle one I think is the least plausible. The second least plausible I'm thinking is the train accident. Things were so over-engineered in those days, and the speeds involved. I'm curious about that one as well, but I think the least plausible is the second one at this stage.
Now I'm really worried because I was actually thinking the third one was the least plausible, which completely splits our field. I mean, admittedly, there was a bank manager. He had his trap. He said his trap, so he was out trapping customers. That's what bank managers do. Craig, you're the chief executive of Conservation SA. You are used to carrying responsibility. Yes. You go first.
I'm going to stick with my choice of the second one, mainly because the third one sounds so crazy that surely you wouldn't invent that.
Sounds very Adelaide, the third one.
Yeah.
Very Adelaide.
No, I'm going to stick with my second choice. Oh, sorry, my first choice, which is the second story.
What he didn't tell you in the third story is the bank manager's name was Thomas Playford. Lee?
I think I have to stick with number two as well. I'm going to go with Craig on that one.
All right, you're number two as well. I'm going with the train. I'm going to go back to the train. And my rationale is, I think he found two stories with the cars. He sort of made this one up because he knows a bit about trains, and he knows a bit about history, and he made that one up. So I'm going to go with the train one is the fake. There we go.
Ooh.
Locked in Eddie. Okay. And I can't read his face yet. I still can't. 113 episodes. I can't read his face.
What hope do we have then?
Yes, I know.
So we all agree that the motor car accident with our famous forefathers and families, the Mr. T. Bar Smith, who now has a library named after the family.
Uh-oh.
And a Mr. and Mrs. F.H. Downer, which might be related to a certain other Downer, is correct. In fact, it is true.
It is. We got it right. So
nice.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was surprised. I was reading
and how much more should be
there
made of that story.
many accidents back then. I was not short of stories at all. It was an absolute blood flowing in the gutters.
Mad Max.
Mad Max is tame compared to Adelaide roads in the turn of the century.
You know what they need to do for the next Mad Max? Mad Max 1903.
He was No, and that's actually a full story, yeah. The bank manager was returning with the takings back to Adelaide, pieces of silver, literally, loaded pistols, literally, and got run into by some of our rather better-off families who, as people mentioned, the well-off start off owning these vehicles before they go down to us mere peasants.
Well done, gentlemen. We all got that one right as being factual because we knew.
We knew.
Yes, we've all borrowed
the kind
books.
of stuff those people get up to.
We've all borrowed books from the Bar Smith Library. We know things. Okay, this is it.
So we'll then jump to story number 1, the train disaster narrowly averted. This story had to be seriously cut down from the 5 A4 pages it was originally. Either it was a quiet week or a quiet day or a quiet year, it went to exquisite detail about this particular real incident.
Oh, great.
And it actually did happen. And they'll go into the details of where they found the holes taken from the hillside where the flat stones came from as well. The train actually did cross the bridge, which was very narrow, and didn't fall off. And it actually was a minor miracle. And the new sort of guide rails that have been added for specifically the reason of stopping trains going, when they get derailed, of going out of the scrub, basically, did their job exactly. And, the guide rail started 15 foot before the bridge, went to 15 foot beyond it.
Wow.
They kept the train upright and going in a straight line over the bridge, even though it was derailed, and the train did crash on the other side of the bridge into the hillside.
Yeah.
No major injuries involved.
Hats off to Craig Wilkins and Lee Dalwood because you've both correctly chosen the second story as the fake.
Hello, I'm Charles Firther in the Chaser. You're listening to the Adelaide Show, and I've been told that I've got to give some useful advice to you. So my advice is stop listening to this show!
Final words to anyone who is thinking of doing something to connect with other humans. Like what we did was connecting with humans on behalf of others. You also are part of at least one meetup group I know of. Do it or not do it? And if you're going to do it, how do you make it sustainable? What's your
I
reading?
don't know. It's a problem we've got at the moment where I think was it last week there was a news story coming out saying that loneliness is like one of the biggest issues now with young people. It's like reached historically high levels of loneliness, and you go, how can they be lonely? They've got their mobile phones, they've got all their friends in front of them in their fingertips. And yet it shows that that actually isn't a friend or a community if they're on some technical device you're holding in your hand. True friendship and knowing someone comes from being in the same presence as them. All the subtle body language cues.
Yeah.
You don't get that on a phone. It's just you just don't get it. You can't possibly get it. Phones don't pass all that information on and everything. So that's probably part of the reason is COVID also came at a horrible time when we had the mixture of increasing use in social media, sort of reaching a pinnacle at that point in time, increasing levels of distrust with existing sort of groups and societies and the government in the world. And then you had COVID came down, you had lockdowns. People could very easily not have to socialise because in many cases you weren't allowed to socialise because of the isolation and the restrictions we had at the time. And it just sort of got people, we noticed it ourselves, like we got used to not going out after 2 years. Yeah. It's like normally we'd be out 2 or 3 times a week doing business meetings and get-togethers and stuff like that. And then with COVID, it all sort of died because all the pubs and all the places you'd normally meet was shut down and you weren't allowed to have more than 8 or 10 people or something. And then there was a real lockdowny part as well. We weren't allowed to really go anywhere. And I think people, it sadly went for long enough where people started to become a habit of not doing that anymore. And I don't think we've sort of bounced back in the way the economy bounced back. Everyone's like, the economy will be depressed forever, won't get interest, blah, blah. And, well, the economy bounced back pretty damn fine. But I don't think people's behaviour has actually bounced back since COVID. It just happened to be too long to get over this is a temporary thing, we got over it. It was long enough to actually change people's behaviour to the extent where the concept of socialising, going out, meeting just for the sake of it sort of got forgotten about. And then people seem to just forget about the enjoyment of being with other people and going out and doing things. And they became literally dependent on their phones, and that, they've just become a habit now. If it was bad before, but literally you travel on any public transport or walk around the town now, everyone is just staring at their phones.
Yeah, all the time.
And it's literally, if you're focusing on your phone, then you're not focusing on the people around you who might be trying to get your attention or might be interesting or just someone to talk to. And I don't think that's going to end well.
No. It's sad, isn't it? And we aren't, because loneliness does not make healthy humans.
No.
I was about to ask, how can we end on a high note? Then I'm realising I'm sitting with Mr. Dystopia.
Yep.
Is there one constructive thing we could do from your to find ballast personally? I know that you're off Facebook these days. Has that been a good thing?
Oh, yeah, and ditched Twitter and Facebook over a year ago now. Yeah, dump them.
Yeah.
Dump them completely. I'm still on Reddit, but then Reddit enables you to choose what groups, and it's down into subgroup.
Yeah.
So, exciting things like woodworking.
Yeah.
There you go. You're not going to get any political discourse on that. And so, just choosing things that are relevant to what you actually want to do rather than just being open to be bombarded with what an algorithm has worked out you might like or you might be interested in.
Yeah.
If you keep on getting told what you want to hear all the time, you will fall completely into confirmation bias and you won't even know you've done it.
And also brings us back to the whole dopamine treadmill.
Yeah.
Too.
Yep.
All right.
So, but no, get out more, enjoy the world, do something to save it.
And at least walk or move or run.
Yeah, every day, even if it's just walking for half an hour to the shops to pick up something you might like or just something you might need or just walking to somewhere interesting or just walking and counting bloody letterboxes. Just get off your ass, and physical exercise is really great for moderating mood levels.
And on another podcast I do, This Medical Life, with Dr. Travis Brown, we just interviewed one of Australia's leading researchers in vitamin D. And as a side note, when I was asking him, he said, look, yes, sunlight's a great way to get it. And he went into the nuances of that. But he said there are actually things that make your body feel better when you're in the sun.
Oh, yeah.
And one of them is it actually lowers cardiovascular. If you've got high blood pressure, it lowers that. It only lowers it while you're in the sun. There's no sustainable. But you feel good
Same
when
with
you're
stress levels. Being in a natural environment naturally lowers people's stress and cortisone levels in their body when they're in. And by natural environment, that is not near buildings and roads and bridges and man-made structures, but out around trees, gardens, and down along the beach, which is a non-man-made environment. Those shapes are natural to a human and put them into a state of things match my expectations at the subconscious level. This isn't as dangerous as it actually is. And yet we just, things like the stranger danger thing from decades ago is one of the worst bits of garbage propaganda ever made, when the biggest danger to most people comes from people I know or their family anyway. But being out in nature for half an hour a day, totally well worth it.
And I hadn't realised, of course, beach is natural as well, because down at Glenelg you've got water, sand and skyscraper next to you. That's all natural.
Yeah, well, soon it'll be just mostly water and sand as the rising sea level cuts into the foundation of the buildings and they fall back into the oceans again.
That's good old Nigel.
Nature recovers its lands.
Seriously, Nigel, it's been bloody amazing having this time with you. And we wouldn't have had this much time together were it not for this enterprise. So thank you for everything, all you've brought throughout that 10 years.
Thank you for putting it all together for all that time as well.
All right.
So, and one day there might be a Is It News book.
Watch this space.
Watch this space.
Watch this space. And shall I let you say good night, Don?
Yeah. It's the wording again.
Just good night, Don.
It's just good night, Don, isn't it? Yeah.
Good old Don Dunstan.
Yeah, we don't seem to have great leaders anymore, do we? In 10 years, has anyone got close-ish? Not at the state level. No.
Really hasn't.
Regardless of party. Yeah. And same at the national, it's just like, not really.
No. And the ones that have a little bout of popularity are a bit like AI. They're just
they seem to be skimming across some connecting dots, but they're not doing anything fundamental.
Yeah,
making hay while sun shines.
Doing fundamental changes that make society better for the majority of the people. That just doesn't seem to be done with any passion anymore. A lot of it appears to be lip service.
But we'd love it to happen. If any,
it'd be great. Yeah,
politicians.
If anyone who's actually a good leader would like to, lead the country, go for it, or lead the state at least, it'd be much appreciated at this point in time.
Nigel Dobson, fantastic. Thanks for being on the Adelaide Show. Over to you. Good night from me.
Good night from me, and good night from Don.
Good night.
And now it's time for the musical pilgrimage.
In the musical pilgrimage, well, this really is a perfect candidate for the musical pilgrimage because it was 40 years ago that the Australian music scene changed. I think it grew up and it cut through into the fabric of our culture with a song called I Was Only 19. The man who penned that, sung it, is John Schumann. John, welcome back to the Adelaide Show.
Mate, I am delighted to be here with you, Steve. My joy is boundless.
Well, look, I'll just tie a couple of quick strands together. One, as you well know, this podcast started life as Another Boring Thursday Night in Adelaide, a loose play on your Red Gum song, One More Boring Thursday Night in Adelaide. That got me into your orbit, which is a wonderful place to be, and it's always been a special part for us. But this song, as we talked about in episode 333, was one where your own comfort level with your voice and the Australian music industry's comfort with your voice merged. Can you just take us through those seminal moments for you with this, the breakthrough element of this song?
I think it was probably at a Melbourne venue, a bit of a bloodbath actually, on St Kilda Road called the Chevron.
Yeah.
And it wasn't my favourite venue, I have to say, but we played a late set about 10 o'clock, I reckon we went on.
Yeah.
And the place was full, and after our set, I remember very clearly I was in what passed for the dressing room, and I was sitting on the floor with my knees up and my back against the wall, and in walked Keith Fowler. Keith Fowler was the program director for 3XY, which was the major music station in Australia bar none. Whatever Fowler did, the rest of the industry followed. Anyway, we hadn't been able to get any airplay on 3XY or in any of the other stations, mainly because of my voice, I think. Oh, and the politics and the fact that you wouldn't ever die wondering what we thought. Anyway, so Keith walked in with a couple of mates, and he said, I'm Keith Fowler, and yada yada yada, and I said, well, you can fuck right off, in my inimitable style, because I didn't think I had anything to lose. Anyway, Keith said, look, you have every right to say that to me, but before I leave, I just want you to know this, that I have been to every major band's gig in Melbourne tonight, and you have the largest, most attentive crowd. And if we're not playing your music on the air, we are the ones who are irrelevant, not you. And he turned around, he went straight back to the station. He opened up the station and left a note on the desk of the program assistant and said, I want you to put I was only 19 on high rotation.
Wow.
So, and then I subsequently became good mates with Keith.
Yeah.
We have I haven't seen him for quite some time because he's moved overseas, but we have a very, good warm friendship, and I regard Keith well. And I thought it was very courageous of him to come stomping into our dressing room. So I think that was where the breakthrough was. Now, what happened with 19 was we released it, or the record company released it, very shortly before I moved out of Melbourne to move back to Adelaide to get married. It was days, literally days, between the Chevron encounter, my wedding, and then the day after, Denise and I left for a 3-month backpacking trip through Southeast Asia with no money because we didn't have any money.
Yeah.
Now, I remember very clearly driving my HQ Holden back from Melbourne at night with the headlights poking into the gloom, and on the AM station, I think it was a Ballarat station, I was only 19, and it was quite a surreal experience. And I thought, wow, that's something. That's really impressive. And then didn't really hear anything more about the success of 19 until a couple of months later, Denise and I arrived in Jakarta from being lost in the wilds of Sumatra. And we went to the post office to pick up our mail, post restant in those days. You remember that, Steve?
Yes.
And there was a stack of telegrams. There were cards from home and everything.
Yes.
But there were a stack of urgent telegrams. And so we literally sat down in the gutter outside the Jakarta post office, which was not a hygienic place to sit, as I recall. But we did, and we had to sort of, Denise being a historian and being a bit more organised, and I put the telexes in sequence so we could work out what had gone on. And apparently this thing had rocketed up the charts. It was at number one. The album on which the song appeared had already shipped gold, and it hadn't even been pressed, just by advanced sales. And the single was number one. To give you an idea, in those days, a single could get to number one by selling about, 15,000. The Red Gum single of 19 sold over 200,000. So, and that was just a single.
That's mind-blowing.
We were pretty excited. And, of course, the record company was very keen for me to abandon the honeymoon and come home. And I repeated the observation that I made to Fowler to them, and that was fuck off. And I think we had a month to go. So our concession was that we would check into a 5-star hotel in Yogyakarta, which the record company paid for, and I would do like a couple of days of phone interviews.
Oh, yes.
Which I did. And then we left. It was interesting because we had no money, and we ended up in this 5-star hotel where everything cost a fortune. And I had to say to the record company, "You got to pick up the tab, mate, because we don't have the money be staying, spending $4 on a cup of coffee when we were, $4 a day was our budget."
Yeah.
Anyway, they were great. They were fantastic. I did it. And then we went overland down to Banjawangi, got the ferry across to Bali, and I went up to stay with some very close friends of ours in Ubud. This was in the days before Ubud had Starbucks. And everywhere I go, I'd meet Australians who leapt upon me and said, "Do you know you've got a number one song at home?" I said, "Yes, I'm aware of that." Yeah, so that was the breakthrough, I think. I bet you didn't want all of that.
I didn't know to ask for all of that, John, because it's an outlier in the realm of what was on our charts, and it just told our story, or part of our story. But it also tempted an anti-war feeling as much as understand the context that war happens and the people are squeezed in between.
Yeah, I often have made the observation, and I think Australians are fundamentally a fair and decent mob. And I think that if you want to change the way Australians think or the way we behave, don't lecture us, don't give us death by PowerPoint. You tell us a story and we will get it and we will understand what we need to do, having understood the story. Yeah. And I think that was the case with 19. I think we all stopped and thought, you know what, we didn't do the right thing by those blokes, regardless of what we thought of the war.
Yeah.
We blamed the soldiers, essentially, and that was very unfair. And I think we all stopped and went, yeah, right, okay, no, that wasn't good. And I think a lot of people, because I directed the artist royalties to the Vietnam Veterans Association, and that was part of the publicity campaign.
Yep.
I think a lot of people bought the single, as a way of saying sorry.
Yeah.
what also is not known is that Red Gum didn't actually want to record the song, so they didn't. It was actually Hugh McDonald and me were the only ones from Red Gum who recorded the song. We released it under the name of Red Gum because that was the contract that we had, but it was session musicians.
And so just one last thing to tie up on that one with war, anti-war, whatever. I think at a heart, my heart is set towards the underdog. I always want to see the underdog get up and have a fight. The reaction to Army is where a lot of the fallout happened, but your song reminded us of the little people who were the pawns in the whole thing. And maybe that's our access point to that Aussie underdog.
Yeah, I think so.
Spirit.
Yeah, the sense of fair play.
Yeah. You also mentioned Bali just in that story, and Bali brings us to the Waifs and brings us to them being part of this re-recorded version 40 years later, all to do with something, and I reckon I've heard your live concert telling people, go on, you can record it if you like, we don't care. And they bought, who was it, Vicky Adonna bought a bootleg Red Gum album in Bali.
Yes, you did, the mole.
I think I'd heard the song around the campfire a million times, growing up on a salmon fishing camp with a lot of war vets, the guys that came back from Vietnam. And Vicky and I were learning to play guitar, and they'd say, play that, you know, and we'd play that song and they'd all cry.
My sister Donna brought back a Red Gum album from Bali, pirated version. Sorry, I did. And we shared a bedroom, so she would play it, and I think she was probably learning to sing it, and I wanted to copy everything Donna did, so I learned it.
Is there a visceral reaction to hearing that, or is there that serves the record company right that you hear about that?
Oh, look, you know, it was very amusing. I mean, the whole bootleg thing, I remember on that trip when Danny and I were there, I'd spoken to Pete Garrett, and he said, listen, can you get me as many Midnight Oil bootlegs as you can when you're there?
Yeah.
You know, I just want to see what they've got. And I said, yeah, no worries, Pete. So when I got to Bali, Denise and I went down to Coombe Beach, where all the record bars were, all the, you know, the cassette shops, and I went in and said, you got any Midnight Oil? And they gave me 4 or 5, you know. So I bought those for Pete, and then I turned around and walked out the door, and I just thought to myself, I wonder. So I turned around and I said, hey, mate, have you got any cassettes by a band called Red Gum? And I said, oh, yes, very, very popular, all sold out now, but more in tomorrow, new album called I Was Only 19. Now, interestingly, of course, we didn't have an album called I Was Only 19. It was the single, but they had got together a sort of like a compilation of tracks, and they sold out the first pressing, and there were more on the way. So I thought that was vastly entertaining.
Oh, yes, as you were, hey, where's my little cut? Thank you very much. One last thing with the Waifs and the female voices in this song.
Sure.
I've seen some very interesting commentary on YouTube around the clip as it's been shared of people saying, this really brings home yet another dimension that was lying in potential within this song. Can you talk to us about this?
Yeah. Look, I mean, the song owes, obviously a great deal to Denny, my wife, who introduced me to Mick Storr and whose story it was, and she had set up when Mick came up to have a chat with me, to see if I could write something about Vietnam veterans. She was thoughtful enough to set up a ghetto blaster and a whole lot of cassettes, and when I remembered, I would replace the cassette or turn it over and press the red button, and I ended up with about 9 of these cassettes. They were education department issues, as I recall.
Yeah.
And so Denny obviously, with that iconic song, the first line, that was, she was, watching the passing out parade.
Yes.
And I had this idea with Donna. I mean, we had to use the first line because that was really iconic. But then Donna went into speaking about the soldier in the third person. They did Canungra, and that's him in his slouch hat with his SLR and green. God help him, he was only 19. So that was really Donna kind of adopting the persona of Denny. And I think what that did was give the song a whole other dimension and incorporate the women, because, you know, we don't often think about the mums and the wives and the sisters who stay behind, you know, particularly the mums, you know, because it's their youngster. I mean, I don't, you know, because I'm not a mother, I can only imagine the heartache that you would have watching, you know, your young son march off to war, knowing that he might not come home, and if he does come home, he's going to be fundamentally altered, you know, certainly psychologically, if not physically. Yeah. So, you know, that would be, and I suppose that Donna was able to incorporate that and drive that emotion into the narrative and that understanding, and broaden the application of the narrative out to include the women, because, you know, like, it's always the women. I mean, Judy Small's song, which I covered in the Vagabond Crew, Mothers, Daughters, Wives, you know, says it all.
Yeah. Wow. Well, let's have a listen to it now. You've whetted our appetite. One comment, though, Denise, being a historian, has she documented well the John Schumann / Red Gum story? Have we got things waiting in the wings to be shared?
She did some interviews with me for the National Screen and Sound Archives a long while ago. But I've also done a lot of oral history. So, you know, there was somebody else who was commissioned to do one for the oral history collection, the National Library's oral history collection.
Okay.
Not sure that she's kind of planned to do anything particular. I mean, she's a historian. She's got her own projects, and not unreasonably, she reckons that I can look after myself, you know.
Yeah, she's a historian. She's married to a bit of history, and she's wedded within some history too.
No, absolutely. I mean, she's a very big part of it. But look, she's got a whole lot of stuff I know that she's collected.
Yeah.
But I'm in perpetual discussions with, you know, agents about a memoir, and so if that comes off, which it will, it's just, I mean, I can do one and it'll be published. The issue is going to be the time, you know, to actually sit down and sort of, you know, construct it all. But I'm still pretty busy, you know. I mean, the Vagabond Crew, we're sort of going from strength to strength, mainly, of course, in the eastern states, because, as Jesus Christ once memorably pointed out, the prophet is not without honour save in his own land.
Yep. Well, some of us turn up when the radical happens, but you know, I know what you mean. I just wish there were renewable red gum plantation forests in Australia, because to have paper made of red gum wood pulp would just be fitting for those memoirs.
Yeah, well.
Anyway, I was only 19. Would you like to do the honours and introduce it for us? And thank you for everything, but also your being wedded of us 10 years of doing this podcast.
Oh, thanks, Steve. Okay, well, look, no, I'm delighted to be a part of it. Look, ladies and gentlemen, what the world needs more than anything else is another recording of I Was Only 19. But in this instance, Shane Nicholson, the producer, rang me and said it would be really good to do one last one on the 40th anniversary, you know, with your voice a little bit different, a little bit more effective, a little more cracked and aged. It was Shane who suggested that we incorporate the Waifs. I jumped at that because I'm a big fan of the Waifs. In fact, when I first heard the Waifs, I thought to myself, so that's where the red gum baton went. So, yeah. So the Waifs jumped at it, bless them, and we met up in Sydney and bunged it down. And ladies and gentlemen, for good or ill, here it is.
Mum and Dad and Danny saw the passing out parade at Puckapungle. It was a long march from cadets. The 6th Battalion was the next to tour, and it was he who drew the car. Yeti Canungra, Shoalwater before they left. And Townsville lined the footpath as they marched down to the quay. This clipping from the paper shows him young and strong and clean. And that's him in his slouch hat with his SLR and greens. God help him, he was only 19.
From Vungtel, riding Chinooks, to the dust of Newey Dak, I've been in and out of choppers now for months. We made our Tinser home VB and pin-ups on the lockers, and an Asian orange sunset through the scrub. Can you tell me, doctor, why I still can't get to sleep? And night time's just a jungle dart and a barking M16. And what's this rash that comes and goes? Can you tell me what it means? God help me, I was only 19. And a 4-week operation when each step could mean your last one on 2 legs. It was a war within yourself, but you wouldn't let your mates down till they had you dusted off. So you closed your eyes and you thought about something else. Then someone yelled out, "Contact front!" and the bloke behind me swore. We hooked in there for hours, then it got a muddy roar. Frankie kicked a mine the day that mankind kicked the moon. God help me, he was going home in June. I can still see Frankie drinking tinnies in the Grand Hotel on a 36-hour rec leave in Vungtau. And I can still hear Frankie lying screaming in the jungle till the morphine came and killed the bloody row. And the Anzac legends didn't mention mud and blood and tears, and the stories that our father told us never seemed quite real. I caught some pieces in my back that I didn't even feel. God help me, I was only 19. And can you tell me, doctor, why I still can't get to sleep? And why the Channel 7 chopper chills me to my feet? And what's this rash that comes and goes? Can you tell me what it means? God help me, I was only 19.
was only 19, John Schumann and the Waifs. What a great version. That has become part of the patchwork of the Australian psyche. And on that note, we are going to tap into a little of the Adelaide psyche, the South Australian psyche, next week to round off our month of Tuesdays, where we'll be doing a Facebook Live, or actually, it will be a Facebook Live. We're going to do a live broadcast of the recording of episode 383, 7:30pm on Tuesday, September 19th, 2023, from the home of Don Violi, the hairdresser to Don Dunstan, and the man who's got many stories that'll just, we'll have a bit of a fun, reflective episode on some of the nostalgic strands of what it has been to live in South Australia in the latter 20th century and the early 21st century. Until then, it's good night from me, Steve Davis. Good night, Don.
The Adelaide Show podcast is produced by my dad, Steve Davis. If you want to start a podcast or get some help producing creative content, talk to him. Visit stevedavis.com.au. Thanks, AJ. I'm Caitlin Davis, and I agree with everything my sister said. But there's one more thing to say. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a rating or a review, because that will make my dad really happy. Oh, and one more thing. If you really, really liked it, please help a friend put the Adelaide Show on their phone. Thanks for listening. Buzz, buzz, I want to be.
Adelaide, 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 ooh, Adelaide, 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 ooh.